I watched the man I loved marry my sister from the back row of our childhood church, and 37 years later, I still taste the salt of those silent tears. I had no idea that stepping away from love that summer would shape every quiet decision I made for the rest of my life. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 73 years old. Some stories take a lifetime to tell, and this one has been sitting in my chest like a stone, waiting for the right moment to breathe. It was 1967 when Michael first walked into our house. I was 24, working at the local bank, saving every penny I could. Sarah was 19, fresh out of high school with dreams bigger than our small town could hold. She had this way about her, golden hair that caught sunlight like spun honey, and a laugh that could fill every corner of a room. Michael was our neighbor's nephew, visiting for the summer. Tall, quiet, with hands that knew how to fix anything broken. I'd catch him reading poetry on the back porch after dinner, his voice soft as evening rain when he'd share a line or two. We talked for hours that first month, about books, about dreams, about the way evening light painted our small town in shades of amber and gold. I felt something I'd never felt before, a quiet certainty that this was the man I could build a life with. There was one evening that summer when the air felt like warm cotton against my skin. Michael walked me home from the bank, the streetlights just starting to blink awake above us. He didn't say anything grand or poetic. He simply asked about my day and listened like every small detail mattered. The radio from someone's kitchen window played "The Way You Look Tonight," and for a moment, I let myself imagine this was what the rest of my life could feel like, walking beside someone who saw me as worth knowing. But Sarah noticed him too. I watched her transform that summer, the way she started wearing dresses instead of overalls, how she'd find reasons to walk past wherever Michael was working. She was so young, so bright, so full of the kind of hope I'd already learned to temper with reality. One evening, I found her crying on our front steps. "I think I love him, Dorothy," she whispered, "but I don't think he even sees me." Something inside me shifted in that moment, like a door closing so softly you barely hear the click. I was the older sister. I'd always been the one to protect her, to step aside when she needed space to grow. This felt like just another moment where that protection was needed. I had no idea that stepping back from that porch, from that summer, would shape every quiet year that followed. So I began to step back from Michael, slowly, carefully, like pulling away from a warm fire on a cold night. Instead of joining their evening conversations, I'd find work to do in the kitchen. When Michael asked where I was, I'd send Sarah to tell him I was busy. When he suggested walks, I'd encourage Sarah to go instead. The hardest moment came on a Thursday in July. Michael found me alone, hanging laundry behind our house. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, a radio played softly. "Dorothy," he said, his voice careful, "have I done something wrong?" I couldn't look at him. My hands trembled as I clipped Sarah's yellow sundress to the line. "You haven't done anything," I said, and it was the truth that hurt most. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the sawdust on his shirt from the carpentry work he'd been doing for my father. "I feel like you're avoiding me," he said, "and I don't understand why, because I thought—" He paused, searching for words. "I thought we had something special." My throat felt raw, like I'd been swallowing sand. "Maybe you should spend more time with Sarah," I said, still not turning around. "She's young, Michael. She has her whole life ahead of her." I heard him take a step back. When I finally looked at him, there was something broken in his expression, like he'd been reaching for something precious and watched it slip away. "Is that what you want?" he asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that what I wanted was to keep talking about poetry on the back porch, to feel his hand brush mine when we passed books back and forth, to build a quiet life filled with the kind of love that grows slowly and lasts forever. Instead, I said, yes. He married Sarah that October. I helped her choose her dress, stood beside her as her maid of honor, and smiled for all the photographs. In every picture, if you look closely enough, you can see the careful distance I kept, the way I turned my body slightly away from the happiness I'd helped create. What I didn't know then was how many more times I would have to choose distance over desire in the years to come. They moved to the next town over. Sarah bloomed in marriage, had 3 beautiful children, built the life she'd always dreamed of. Michael became a good husband, a devoted father. I'd see them at Christmas gatherings, at birthday parties, at church, on the rare occasions when I visited home. He never looked at me the same way again. I moved to Chicago 2 years after their wedding, told everyone it was for a better job at a bigger bank. Really, I just needed distance from the life I'd given away. I built a different kind of life there, quiet, independent, filled with work and books and the kind of friendships that didn't require explaining why I'd never married. There was a man at the bank in Chicago, Richard from accounting, who asked me to dinner 3 times over the course of 2 years. He was kind, stable, the sort of man who would have made a good husband. But every time he smiled at me, I saw Michael's face instead. I turned Richard away as gently as I could, telling him I wasn't ready for anything serious. The truth was, I'd given my heart to a ghost. But secrets have weight, and 37 years is a long time to carry something that heavy. Last month, Sarah died. Cancer, swift and merciless. I came home for the funeral, stood once again in that same church where I'd watched her marry the man I'd loved. This time, I sat in the front row, holding her children's hands, speaking about the sister who'd been the brightest light in our family. After the service, after the reception, after most people had gone home, Michael found me in my rental car. He was 68 now, his dark hair gone silver, lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of laughter and sorrow and all the quiet moments that make up a life. But when he looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen since that summer of 1967. "Dorothy," he said, "could we talk?" We drove to the old bridge at the edge of town, the one where teenagers used to park and dream about futures that seemed both infinite and impossible. We sat on the hood of my car, looking out at the water that had been running through this place long before we were born and would keep running long after we were gone. "I want to tell you something," he said, "something I should have said decades ago." The evening air was cooling, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of children playing, their voices carrying across the water like echoes from our own past. "That summer," Michael continued, his voice quiet but steady, "I was falling in love with you." My breath caught like a piece of glass lodged in my throat. After all these years, after all the careful distance and buried feelings, hearing those words felt like a door opening in a house I'd thought was permanently locked. The words I'd been waiting 37 years to hear finally filled the space between us, and I realized I had never stopped hoping for this moment. "I know you chose to step away," he said. "I never understood why, but I respected it. And I want you to know that Sarah and I built a good life together. We were happy, really happy. But there was always this question mark, this wondering about what might have been." He turned to look at me then, and I saw my own reflection in his eyes, an old woman who'd spent most of her life protecting other people's happiness at the expense of her own. "Did you love me too?" he asked. The question hung in the air between us like morning mist, delicate and fragile and impossible to ignore. I thought about all the years I'd kept that answer locked away, about the life I'd built in Chicago, the careful independence I'd cultivated, the way I'd learned to be content with books and work and the quiet satisfaction of a choice well made. But sitting there beside him, with Sarah's funeral still fresh in my memory and the weight of decades pressing down on both of us, I realized that some truths are too important to die with you. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I loved you more than I knew how to say." He was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the water below us. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why did you step away?" And so I told him about Sarah's tears on the front steps, about the way she'd looked at him with all the hope and innocence of 19 years old, about the choice I'd made to protect her happiness, even if it meant sacrificing my own. "She was my little sister," I said. "She needed love more than I did, or at least that's what I told myself." We sat there as the sun set, two people who'd loved each other from a distance for most of their lives, finally speaking the words that had been waiting decades to be said. The strangest part was how peaceful it felt, not devastating or tragic, just complete. Like a book that had been missing its final chapter suddenly finding the words it needed to end properly. Michael reached over and took my hand. His skin was weathered now, marked by years of work and life and all the small moments that add up to a human existence. But his touch was still gentle, still familiar in a way that made my chest ache with recognition. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For loving us both enough to make that choice, for giving Sarah the chance to be happy, for carrying that secret all these years so she never had to doubt whether she was truly chosen." We drove back to town in comfortable silence. He walked me to the door of my hotel, and for a moment we stood there like teenagers again, uncertain about how to say goodbye. "Will I see you again?" he asked. I thought about my life in Chicago, about the apartment filled with books and the job I'd returned to on Monday, about all the careful routines I'd built to keep loneliness at bay. "I don't know," I said, and it was the most honest answer I could give. He nodded, understanding passing between us like a shared breath. "I'm glad we finally talked," he said. "I'm glad we finally said what needed to be said." That night, lying in my hotel bed, I thought about the girl I'd been at 24, so sure that love meant sacrifice, so certain that stepping aside was the same as strength. But I found myself wondering, what would have happened if I'd chosen differently? What kind of life might we have built together? What kind of woman would I have become if I'd learned earlier that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is fight for your own happiness? There are no answers to those questions, of course. The past is written in ink, unchangeable and absolute. But something about finally speaking those buried truths had shifted something inside me, like a knot I'd been carrying for decades had finally loosened. I'm 73 years old. I don't know how many years I have left, how many chances for new chapters or different choices. But I know this. I spent 37 years protecting everyone else's happiness. Maybe it's time to see what my own happiness might look like. When I got back to Chicago, I did something I'd never done before. I bought myself flowers. Not for any special occasion, just because they were beautiful and because I deserved to have beautiful things in my life. They're sitting on my kitchen table now, yellow roses that remind me of Sarah's hair in the sunlight. Every time I look at them, I think about love and sacrifice and the difference between protecting someone and protecting yourself. A week after I returned home, I found myself standing outside the community center 2 blocks from my apartment. They were advertising a writing class for older adults. "Everyone has a story," the sign said in crooked blue letters. For years, I had told myself my story didn't matter as long as everyone else was taken care of. That afternoon, with Sarah's memory sitting beside me like an old friend, I walked inside and wrote my name on the list. It was the smallest of choices, but it felt like the first time I had ever stepped toward my own life instead of away from it. And for the first time in decades, I think I'm finally learning to choose me,